Okay, so last class we were talking about categorical data in particular, and talking about how we can represent categorical data. This time we're going to be looking at numerical data distribution. So that's our title here: numerical data distribution. All right. So numerical data distribution, and there are a couple of different ways that we're going to look at displaying that numerical data. In particular, we're going to be looking at frequency tables again, histograms, dot plots, that sort of stuff. So we'll do an example of each just so we get an idea of how everything's going to work. We can also look at two different types of numerical data displays. We have data that is considered to be grouped. We have grouped data, and we have ungrouped data. All right. And depending on the sort of question, you'll have to figure out which one of these two things, I guess, are what we're looking for. So when we're talking about grouped data, we're looking into data that it's like individual data points. And that's kind of better because it gives us a clearer picture of what we're looking at, whereas group data is sort of like we get little clumps lumped together, but we don't get told the exact values. So for group data, you might have, say, like the height of a couple of students. So let's say we're looking at height. I'm just going to put height, in centimeters. For ungrouped data, we might have like 178, we might have like 167, we might have 181, maybe 172, etc. Right? So we have a series of ungrouped data, which is individual pieces of data, and that's fine for what we're going to use it for. Alternatively, you can have grouped data, whereas you get told that there are like a couple students in the class that range between 170 and 175. You might get told that there's, say, 3 or 4 data points in there, if that makes sense. You might get told, okay, here there's 3 students within that range, right? There are maybe there's 2 students within this range, for example, and maybe you have 1 student that's over 180. That's sort of the difference between those two, if that makes sense, right? So we're looking at, is the data clumped together and given to us in like individual little groups, or are we looking at individual pieces of data, right? Quite often we actually get the ungrouped and we get told to put it into groups for the purposes of making these graphs, right? So we'll just do an example. So let's say let's say there was a test that a bunch of students did, and I'll just put down the marks of the test that I'm just going to make up. All right, so this is our ungrouped data. So this is, I'm just going to put it in the title. So this is a frequency table. All right, and we did already talk about frequency tables last class. So let's say the test was out of 30, and I'll have a couple of marks here. So I might have like 20, 26, 30, 19, 17. I'm just going to make up some numbers here just for the sake of solving a question like this. Right, so let's say that's my ungrouped data there. They're my individual test scores, and I want to try and make something useful out of this data, right? Well, I can group them together and make a frequency table, and there's no real like rule of thumb for doing this, but I guess you just want to pick intervals that are not too big, because if you pick intervals that are too big, then your data is not going to show you a whole lot. So I guess the smaller the interval, the better sort of spread you'll get from your data. But you also don't want to pick tiny intervals because then your frequency table is going to be huge, right? So I think in this case I might pick maybe groups of 3, sorry, not groups of 3. I might 3 marks. I think is probably the best way to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look here. I'm going to find the smallest value that I have, and I'm going to find the largest value that I have, and that'll help me do my groupings. So my smallest value. So smallest value is what? 7. So 7 marks. I should probably do that in blue to be consistent. So smallest is 7 marks, and my largest or my best score was 30. All right. So I need to know that my lowest group in my frequency table is going to accommodate for my lowest mark, if that makes sense. So I'm going to start my group off from 7, and I'm going to make a little frequency table here. I'm just going to go up by 3. So I'm going to say, 7 to 10. I'm going to say 11 to 14. I'll say 15 to 18. I'll say 19 to 22. Say 23 to 26, and then 27 to 30. All right. It's just nice that it worked out that way. It doesn't always work out as perfectly as that. Sometimes you might get you might have to do 29 plus or something like that, and that's okay. But yeah, this is just happened to work out quite nicely. So these are my groups for my frequency table. All right. I'm just going to draw it up, make it look a little bit more like a table and less like I've just written a couple of lines. So these are my intervals. Interval. I might have a little tally if I want to tick them off as I go. It's up to you. So maybe you want to add in a row for tally. All right. So tally, and then I'll have another one for total. All right. You can even go one step further and have the percentage, the percentage of the total scores and where that fell. So that's kind of interesting too, but we're going to leave that off for now. So I'm just going to go through, I'm just going to tally up where everything is and then find out my totals. So I've got between the 7 to 10 mark, inclusive obviously, I've just got 7 and 10. 7 and 10. I think that's everything. So by total there's 2. 11 to 14, I've got 1, 2, I think 2 as well. All right. 15 to 18, I have 1, 2. I've distributed these really well. 19 to 22, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think it's just 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 23 to 26, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then lastly, I've got 29, 29, and 30, which is my final 3. Right? And that's my frequency table for the distribution of marks for this particular test, if that makes sense. Right? So I've just done a little thing to put it together. So that's one way that you can sort of lay out your numerical data. You can actually take this as well and use it to make other data displays too. So let's make a histogram now. So a histogram. I'm just going to have to scooch that up a smidge so you can see still. We're making a histogram. We're going to use the same, I think I might just use the same data for this one, just so you can see how these things sort of relate. So let's pretend I'm using the exact same data. I can even use the same groupings down the bottom, which would be fine. I wanted to point out the difference between a histogram and like a bar chart. is that the bar charts are used for categorical, number one. The bar chart is not a range of values like a histogram is, and also a bar chart, the bars are not pushed together, they're all spread out, if that makes sense. So, you know, a bar chart sort of looks like you know, like this, right? Whereas a histogram, they're all pressed up against each other, so it sort of looks more like this. Yeah, if that makes sense. So yeah, they're very slightly different. So let's use the same values and we'll draw up a histogram. So obviously you can do this with a ruler, but I don't have one, so I'm just gonna sort of tee it up. All right. I'm not sure how long that's going to be, so I'm just going to leave that for the moment. So on my x-axis, I guess I can represent the ranges, is probably the best way to go about doing these. So you do your ranges on the x-axis. On the y-axis, you're going to do your frequency, yeah, or whatever your dependent variable is. So let's draw this up. We have at the bottom our intervals. So usually you'll start off at 0, but I'm just going to put in this like squiggly line here. That sort of means that there are values below this, but there are no like data points below it, if that makes sense. Like I'm just sort of starting off the number line a bit further along to avoid wasting space. So I'm going to start here at 7. I probably should have started, it doesn't matter. I'll start at 7, all right? So we've got 7 to... And the way that I've been doing it is I've sort of been going in between values here. So I might make these like halves. So 10.5, so we can have like above and below 10.5. We can have, what, 14.5. 18.5, 22.5, 26.5, and we'll just do up to 30, I guess. Right? I guess the reason that I'm doing 0.5s is because I didn't do, because we're dealing with whole numbers only, I didn't have to do like less than or equal to and things like that. But if you are dealing with continuous variables, it's better off to have like, for your intervals, you might have 7 to less than 10, and then you might have 10 to less than 14 and things like that. But I'll do an example of one of them after this. All right, so that's our setup for our histogram, and now it's just basically working the exact same way as a frequency table. On the side, I'm going to have the frequencies. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, and I'm just going to go through and tally these up. So 7 to 10 was what, 2? Next one was 2. Next one was 2. Then we had 5. Then we had 4. And then we had 3. Right, so that's what our histogram looks like. Yeah? Does that make sense? Maybe. All right, I'll give you a second if you want to copy that down.